When you're choosing your kayak, first off, you want to make sure you pick something that's a sit on top style. What this is it allows you to sit on top of the kayak and keeps you up high, gives you a nice dry ride. It's also easier for you to bring fish into the kayak when you actually land them. And the biggest benefit of these kayaks is when water gets inside, it comes back out. So as you can see here, these kayaks have scupper holes up in the front. They also have some under the seat and in the rear. What this allows for is water to come into your kayak if it does accidentally, and it just drains right out so you don't flood yourself. And all of the inside compartments are actually sealed. That way water doesn't get into those areas so you don't flood out your kayak. So next, a very important thing that you want to consider when you get a kayak is finding something that is stable enough that you can stand up in. Now this kayak you can stand up in. The seat actually folds back and gives you plenty of room to stand up, as you can see there. But you can also stand up in this kayak without having to put the seat back, just standing right in front of the seat. So it's super stable for that. Sit-in style kayaks don't really, they're just not really user friendly for that. So definitely get yourself a sit on top, something that you could preferably stand in. If not, you can kind of get used to the kayak you have. If it's really narrow, it's going to kind of be hard to stand in, but you can kind of practice a little bit, take it out on the water, get a little comfortable with that. Even if you could just stand up to see what's going on the water, not necessarily fish while standing, but just so you can get a better perspective. So that's for the kayak. Next thing is your paddle. This is probably your most important tool when you are on the water. When you invest in a paddle, get something lightweight. What happens is if you get a really heavy paddle, the aluminum paddles are the heaviest. This one is fiberglass. It's kind of in the middle, and then the top of the line paddles are carbon fiber, and those are actually the lightest. If you can afford one of those, they go in about $400 or $500, so they get really high up there. There are some cheaper ones you can kind of get away with, about 200 bucks. But definitely get something lightweight because you want to save your arms for actually fishing instead of moving around all the time. Now with that being said, there are also kayaks out there that are pedal drive. So you don't even have to use a paddle. You just move around by basically pushing pedals just like you would a bicycle. And there's fins or a propeller under the kayak that actually propels you forward or reverse. So the only downside of those pedal drive kayaks is that they're really not cheap. They can range anywhere from $1,500 up to $3,000–$4,000 depending on what you get. They're also very heavy, so kind of have their pros and cons, so take that into consideration when you're buying a kayak. So next, you want a way to anchor yourself that's effective. And the most effective way that I found is using an anchor pin, because most likely if you're fishing inshore, you're going to be fishing shallow water. Now this is, I believe this is a 7-foot anchor pin. So you can anchor up in water shallow enough that's about 5 or 6 feet at the most. You really don't want the water to be too close to the top, because what this allows for is the rope to be at the top, and then it'll pull that anchor pin over when you're anchored. So you want that rope on your anchor pin to be nice and solid, sliding up and down rather on your anchor pin, so that it's even with the water line. That way, if you're anchored right there, the water's that high, it doesn't pull the pin over when it's anchored up top, okay? Now with the anchor pin, you're gonna wanna anchor trolley. As you can see, the rope is attached here to an anchor trolley. You can either use a carabiner clip like so, or just tie the rope directly to the anchor trolley on the ring or whatever's there to attach it to. And what this does is allows you to move the position of the anchor to either the front of the kayak. It can also be anchored in the middle, depending on the wind or current. However, this way is kind of dangerous because if you're anchored and it tips, you can kind of fall over there. So be careful if anchoring on the side. And then lastly, you can move it all the way to the back so that you're anchored in the back of your kayak. So that's a very effective tool for anchoring and positioning yourself, especially for fishing in the wind. All right, so next I want to talk about rod holders, especially when you're putting them on your kayak or putting any equipment on your kayak in general. First thing you don't want to do is buy a kayak and load it up with gear. attaching rod holders, because what can happen is when you're out on the water, you might attach this rod holder too far back to the point where it's getting in the way of your paddling, or you might place it too far forward where you can't reach it comfortably, and it just makes for a miserable day on the water. So take your kayak out on the water before you actually add equipment to it. That way you can kind of get an idea of where stuff should go. That way you're not having to move stuff around, because once you put holes in your kayak, you have holes in your kayak. Because most of this stuff you have to drill into your kayak or put rivets in, and that creates a hole in your kayak. So we don't want to do that. So definitely make sure that you are taking your kayak out on the water before you actually add any equipment to it. Now, positioning your rod holder, it's best to have one in front of you, because you can place your rod in there like so. Place your rod in the rod holder, and now your hands are free to fix your lure, retie a lure, take a fish off, or just keep it up in front of you while you're paddling. That way, if you come across a fish, you can just grab your rod, cast out, and you're pretty much good to go there. So that does it for the rod holders. Lastly, I just want to let you know not to take too much stuff with you when you're out on the water. If you bring too many rods, you're going to end up fumbling around. You might have two rods out in front of you at the same time, and you'll get tangled up. So definitely try to avoid that. And also your tackle, don't bring too much tackle with you. Only bring what you know works, what you're confident with. If you bring too much stuff out there, you're going to spend more time switching lures around and trying to figure out what the fish want, as opposed to just sticking to one lure, getting confident with it, and catching fish using that lure. And also, when you bring too much equipment, it'll add weight to your kayak, and definitely don't want to do that, especially when you have to use your arms to get around and basically just use yourself to propel your kayak. So anything you add to the kayak is going to add weight and can also get in the way. So keep that in mind when rigging up your kayak for fishing.